"Excuse me, but I think you're sitting in the wrong seat." The words cut through the stillness of business class on Flight 227 from New York to Miami like a blade. Almost every head turned towards seat 3A, where a 42-year-old black woman quietly flipped through the pages of Forbes. Her name was Naomi Carter. A tailored navy suit hugged her balanced frame. A diamond ring caught the cabin light, flashing coldly as if it had just emerged from Christie's auction house. Naomi said nothing. She only lifted her head, her calm but piercing gaze halting the man looming above her. That man was Ethan Blake, a white man in his 50s. A wrinkled polo clung to his paunch. His flushed face radiated irritation. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled boarding pass. "This is my seat, 3A. I paid extra for it," he barked, waving the ticket as if it were irrefutable evidence. Naomi remained silent. Her fingers pressed gently on the magazine page, as if holding something steady inside her. The air in business class tightened like a pulled string. Passengers whispered, "Maybe she mixed up her seat. Not everyone can afford to sit here. I've never seen a black woman in this section before." Words spoken softly, but sharp as knives. Naomi heard every syllable, though she gave no reply. She only tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes as though peering into Ethan's very core. Ethan stepped closer, looming over her with height and hostility. "Where'd you rent that suit? Looks fancy, but business class isn't the place to test your luck." Snickers rose from two passengers behind her. A middle-aged businesswoman shook her head and muttered to her companion, "What a nuisance. We pay thousands to sit here, and now this?" Naomi lowered the magazine. Not to retaliate, but to steady her pride, pierced once again. She remembered being a child, ordered out of a store because the owner believed, "A black kid can't buy anything here." That humiliation had carved itself deep into her memory, and now, 30 years later, it replayed on a polished jet in business class. A younger female voice broke the tension. "Is there a problem here?" It was Lean Tran, a 27-year-old Asian-American MBA student in seat 3B. She glanced up from her laptop, her irritation clear. Ethan didn't even look at her. His voice was sharp. "No problem, just someone who doesn't know her place." That line, in a cabin heavy with judgmental eyes, felt like a sentence pronounced. Naomi quietly reached into her bag and handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant. Clear print, seat 3A, business class. But instead of ending the argument, it fueled suspicion. "Must be a system glitch," Ethan sneered. A man in a grey suit from 4C chimed in, "I've seen this before. People are trying to upgrade illegally." All eyes pinned Naomi, not with sympathy, but with doubt, as if she were trespassing, as if she didn't belong. Naomi glanced at her watch. 3:12 p.m. 18 minutes until takeoff. Enough time for a human being to be dissected under public gaze. The moment spread. Lynn silently opened her phone, whispering, "I think the world needs to see this." She started live streaming. A stewardess arrived, her smile strained. "Ma'am, perhaps we can rearrange seating. We can move you to first class, or you can step out to the counter to re-verify, so that we don't delay departure." Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was neither loud nor trembling, but firm and deliberate, like a gavel striking wood. "I am in my rightful seat, and I am not moving." The cabin shivered in silence. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "Don't you get it? You're delaying the whole flight. Some of us here are flying to Miami to sign million-dollar contracts. We can't waste time on you." Naomi's eyes locked on him, steady, unyielding. He faltered for a second, then leaned in closer, whispering just loud enough for nearby rows. "You can wear expensive clothes, flash shiny rings, but you'll never belong here." The words hit like stones. Naomi knew. This wasn't about a seat, it was a test of dignity. The plane hadn't left the ground, but a confrontation had begun, and no one in business class yet realized they were about to witness something unforgettable. Naomi Carter remained seated in 3A, her hand resting gently on the closed magazine, but in her eyes, an old memory replayed, flickering like an aged film reel. She was 15 again, walking into the admissions hall of a prestigious high school for a scholarship interview. The receptionist had looked straight at her and said flatly, "You must be in the wrong room. This is for scholarship candidates." That look of contempt had scarred her for life. And now, in this polished business-class cabin, she saw the very same look again, this time reflected in more than 10 passengers. They didn't need to speak. The frowns, the lifted chins, the impatient sighs, all of it screamed the same thing. "You don't belong here." Ethan Blake suddenly raised his crumpled ticket high, like a flag of victory. "Here's the proof. I booked seat 3A last month. Don't delay this flight just because someone's trying to steal a seat." The man in the grey suit in 4C chimed in. "I agree. I've flown business class for years. Never seen anyone behave like this." Another voice, a blonde woman in 2C. "This is exactly why upgrades need stricter control. Otherwise, anyone could end up sitting here." The words didn't call her name, but every single one was aimed at Naomi. Naomi inhaled deeply, not to calm herself, but to feel every ounce of injustice pressing in. She looked at her hand, the diamond flashing under the cabin light, proof of years of fighting, climbing, turning every insult into fuel. She wanted to speak, to cry out, "I worked myself half to death to sit here. I've signed contracts most of you could never dream of." But she stopped herself. Because she knew, sometimes the most powerful voice is not an instant protest, but silence held at the right moment. The purser, Clara James, approached, a white woman in her 40s, her forced smile trained to diffuse conflict. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara bowed slightly, but her eyes went to Ethan, not Naomi. "We'll sort this out right away. Please don't worry." The way she angled her body, shielding Ethan, made it look as if Naomi was the problem. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" Clara asked Naomi softly, but with an unmistakable command behind her eyes. Naomi slowly opened her bag and handed over the ticket. Clara glanced at it, frowned briefly, then immediately turned to Ethan. "Sir, it looks like the system double-booked this seat. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Ethan barked out a triumphant laugh. "Told you so. She'll have to move." Clara turned back to Naomi, still smiling, but her tone hardened. "Ma'am, to avoid further delays, please cooperate and move to another seat. I can arrange first class for you. It will be more comfortable." Naomi's eyes locked with Clara's, not fearful, but calm and deep as still water. "I purchased this seat. I'm not moving." Whispers rose again. A few shook their heads. Several phones lifted into the air, recording. In seat 3B, Lintran clutched her phone tightly. She had been live streaming for minutes now, the viewer count climbing rapidly. Hundreds of comments poured across the screen. "My God, another case of discrimination. And that woman looks calm but strong." "That man is pure arrogance." Lynn swallowed hard. She realized she was witnessing history, something far larger than a seat dispute. But Ethan refused to stop. He stepped closer, his shadow blotting out the cabin light above Naomi. "You know," he sneered, "we pay for more than wide seats up here. We pay to avoid situations like this." His eyes raked over Naomi with open contempt. The remark drew chuckles from a few passengers, the laughter sliced like knives. Naomi sat still, but her hand gripped the armrest tighter. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed, "You don't need to shout. You only need to stand firm. The world will reveal itself." From the cockpit, the captain emerged. David Rogers, a white man with salt and pepper hair, his expression tight with irritation. The flight had already been delayed 10 minutes. "What's going on here?" he asked Clara. "Seat 3A is double-booked, Captain. We're handling it," Clara replied. Rogers glanced at Naomi, then at Ethan. His gaze lingered longer on the man standing, and in that instant, his bias showed plain as day. "Ma'am," Rogers said firmly, "if you cannot produce the correct ticket, I'll have to ask you to deplane and resolve this at the counter." The cabin fell into heavy silence. Ethan smirked, arms crossed, confident victory was in hand. Naomi rose, every movement slow, deliberate, not merely leaving a seat, but erecting an invisible wall between herself and all the accusing eyes. She pulled her handbag from the overhead bin. For a moment, the cabin went still, waiting for her to walk out through the door. But Naomi didn't move toward the exit. She stood still, one hand on her bag, her eyes sweeping across each face, from the gloating white man to the Asian student live streaming, from the awkward stewardess to the stern captain. A chill spread through the cabin, because in Naomi's eyes there was no fear, only a calm that carried the weight of knowing something none of them yet understood. The digital clock above the aisle blinked. Departure, 7 minutes. Tension climbed with every tick. Ethan broke first, snapping at her. "What are you standing there for? Get off. There are places you will never belong." Naomi smiled faintly, not a gentle smile, but the knowing smile of a chess player poised for checkmate. And in that moment, a premonition rippled through the cabin. Perhaps this man had awakened the wrong storm. Naomi did not move, but the actual storm was only beginning. Naomi Carter stood tall, handbag in hand, unmoving. The stark white cabin light illuminated her face, a stillness so profound it seemed otherworldly. "Ma'am," Captain Rogers spoke again, his voice dry, "if you don't leave the aircraft right now, I will have to call security. We cannot afford to delay this flight any longer." The entire business class held its breath. Ethan Blake leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, a smug smile curling on his lips. He was used to this feeling, being prioritized, being trusted, being placed on the right side of every decision. Naomi did not answer. She rotated her wrist slightly and placed her bag back down on the seat. A faint laugh rippled from a row behind. A blonde passenger whispered to her companion, "See, she's finally being kicked off. My guess is she bought an economy ticket and snuck up here." The man in the grey suit in 4C cleared his throat. "This is the problem. If everyone thinks they deserve to sit here, then what's the point for those of us who paid?" Silent nods around him reinforced his words. Business class, once a space of etiquette, had transformed into a courtroom where Naomi now stood on trial before the public. In seat 3B, Lin Tran's hands trembled as she held her phone. Her live stream had drawn thousands of viewers. Comments flooded in. "Unbelievable. It's 2025 and this is still happening. Why is she still so calm? The captain is biased, outrageous." But inside the cabin, none of the outside outrage could be heard. Naomi stood alone in a forest of cold stares. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice but loud enough for several rows to catch. "You know what? I've flown business for 20 years. I've never seen someone like you here. You look more like you snuck in than paid your way." Each word dropped like stones against her dignity. Some passengers averted their eyes, but no one spoke up. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. In that moment, she remembered her father, a taxi driver his entire life, who once told her, "Sweetheart, people will always believe you're not good enough, not clean enough, not white enough to belong. But you don't need to prove yourself to everyone. Just keep your back straight and let them reveal themselves." His words now thundered inside her. Clara, the purser, still wore her professional smile, but her hands gripped her clipboard tightly. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "please cooperate. We can reassign you, even to first class. It would be a better experience. Please don't make this more uncomfortable than it needs to be." Naomi lifted her head, her voice steady. "The discomfort doesn't come from me. It began with the way everyone here looked at me." The cabin fell silent for a beat. Then Ethan scoffed loudly. "Oh, don't turn this into a race issue. The simple fact is you don't belong here." The digital clock glowed. Departure 5 minutes. The air thickened, pressing in on every chest. Captain Rogers nodded at Clara. "Call security." Clara hesitated, her eyes flicking to Naomi, then back to Ethan. The decision was all too easy. Remove the silent black woman rather than confront the shouting white passenger. Naomi still did not move. She turned instead, locking eyes with the captain. Her gaze was not defiance, but a wordless reminder. "You are exposing your own bias before the entire world." Lynn whispered into her camera. "Do you see this? They're about to throw her off this plane. Even though she has a ticket, this is the discrimination we've been talking about all along." The view count spiked, 3,000, 5,000, 70. Out there, a whole community was watching. But inside the cabin, Naomi was still alone. Ethan's grin spread wider, his confidence swelling into near triumph. He leaned in close to Naomi's ear. "Be smart and get off. I have an important meeting in Miami, and you're just here to taste luxury for a few hours." Naomi turned her head toward him, her eyes serene. She said nothing. Only a faint smile appeared, small, but sharp as a hidden blade. 2 airport security officers entered the cabin, their footsteps striking the floor in a tense rhythm. Clara exhaled in relief. Finally, it's handled. But Naomi did not move. She set her bag back on the seat, straightened her posture, and put her hands at her sides. The entire cabin became a stage. More than 60 passengers, unwilling spectators, now waited to see how this black woman would be escorted away. Naomi's gaze swept slowly across the faces. Some looked at her with pity, others with avoidance, others with folded arms of cold judgment. But in 3B, Lin Chan held her phone high, her eyes burning with anger. Naomi gave her the slightest nod, a silent thank you. Then she stepped forward, not toward the door of the plane, but toward the front, where the captain, the purser, and Ethan Blake stood waiting. A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "What is she doing?" Ethan jabbed a finger at her. "See? Stubborn, refusing to comply. This is exactly why the flight is delayed." Scattered murmurs of agreement followed. Injustice had now become a chorus. Naomi stopped. She didn't argue. Instead, she slowly opened her handbag. Every eye locked onto the movement, as though she were about to draw a weapon. But what Naomi pulled out was only a slim file sealed with a bright red stamp. She placed it into Captain Rogers's hands. "Before you call security," Naomi said, her voice low and steady, "perhaps you should look at this." Rogers frowned and flipped through the pages. Within seconds his expression shifted, irritation to confusion, then finally to shock. He inhaled sharply, his hands trembling. "My God," he muttered. Clara leaned in for a glance, her hand slackening until the clipboard slipped to the floor. Ethan lunged forward. "What is it? Fake papers? Don't believe her!" But Rogers raised his head, his voice breaking. "Mrs. Carter, I had no idea." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression calm. And in that moment, the cabin fell into absolute silence. Even the roar of the engines outside seemed to fade. Every eye fixed on Naomi. No longer with contempt, but with unease, fear, and the beginnings of respect. Lynn whispered into her phone. "Oh my God, did you see that? The captain just changed his face. This is huge." The live stream exploded, 12,000 viewers. Naomi said nothing more. She slid the file back into her bag, sat down again in seat 3A as if nothing had happened. Every movement is slow, deliberate, but heavy enough to overturn the order of the cabin. Ethan froze, his face pale. And the entire business class, which moments before had been her jury, now found themselves on trial. Naomi had not raised her voice. She had not argued. With one document, in one moment, she had silenced the entire world inside that plane. But this was only the beginning. The atmosphere in business class froze solid. Captain Rogers still stood there, hands trembling as he held the file Naomi had given him. His face had gone pale, as if he were staring at a death sentence. "Mrs. Carter," he stammered, voice hoarse. "If I had known earlier, Naomi sat calmly back down in seat 3A, crossed her legs, and reopened Forbes as though nothing had happened. With a single flick of her hand, she cut him off. "The point isn't what you would have done if you knew who I was. The point is how you treated me when you thought I was nobody." Whispers erupted. Those same passengers who had muttered against her moments earlier now fell silent. Their eyes shifted, curiosity turning to unease, unease bending into shame. But Ethan Blake still refused to yield. His voice was sharp, desperate. "Don't be fooled. Those papers could be fake. Someone like her could never—" He trailed off, but everyone understood what he meant. A black woman could never own something so powerful. Naomi lifted her head, her eyes shining still and deep as water. She didn't need to shout. She placed on the table a gold-embossed card bearing the gleaming logo of Global Equity Partners, the largest investment firm in the region. Clara, the purser, leaned forward for a look. Her lips trembled. My God! That's the company that just acquired 62% of Transworld Airlines last month. Naomi closed the magazine, her voice even and deliberate. Correct. And I am the head of that company, which means… She paused, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. You are flying on my airline. An invisible tremor rippled through the cabin. Ling Chun nearly shouted into her phone. Oh my God! Did you all hear that? She's the owner of this airline, the actual owner. The live stream view count skyrocketed. 20,000, 28,000, 35,000. Ethan stood speechless, his face turning red, then white, then red again. He stammered. No, impossible. You're just bluffing. Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. Not a kind smile, but the smile of a chess master who knows her opponent has no more moves. Mr. Blake, this game is over, and sadly you lost it all by yourself. I never had to win. Captain Rogers lowered his voice, almost pleading now. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry. Truly, I'm sorry. If I had known… Naomi cut him off, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Captain, you are proving exactly what I wanted revealed. You only apologize because I am the owner. When you believed I was just an anonymous black woman, you decided to remove me from this plane. Do you see the difference? The cabin fell into crushing silence. A few passengers dropped their heads. The naked truth hung heavy, and they, witnesses all, had nowhere to hide. Ethan leapt up, trying to salvage his ground. Fine. Suppose she does have power, but it doesn't change the fact that she delayed this entire flight. Everyone here has important business, not just her. Naomi closed the magazine again, her eyes drilling into him. Do you even know why I'm on this trip? Ethan froze. It had never crossed his mind that someone like her could have a meeting more critical than his. Naomi unlocked her phone and set it on the table. The screen displayed an email. Board meeting agenda, Miami acquisition. A woman in the front row whispered, Oh God, that's the $2 billion deal all over the financial news. Naomi nodded, her voice steady. While Mr. Blake worries about his meeting, I am on my way to finalize a deal that determines the future of tens of thousands of employees. Yet because of my skin color, he assumed his business outweighed mine. The murmurs rose again, but this time not with contempt, but outrage directed at Ethan. A younger passenger whispered, He just destroyed his reputation in front of tens of thousands of viewers. Lynn held her phone higher, her voice trembling with excitement. We are witnessing history. This woman just turned humiliation into revelation. Naomi stood, slowly turning in a circle, her gaze resting on each face. You all saw it with your own eyes. I sat quietly in my rightful seat. And yet, because I am a black woman, people assumed I was wrong. They were ready to drag me off to protect a white passenger shouting at me. That was never about a double booking. It was about double standards. A shiver ran through the cabin. Those who had sneered earlier now avoided her eyes. Ethan, trembling, tried again. I didn't mean to be racist. I was just… Naomi cut him off, her voice slow but unyielding. You don't need to scream to prove your prejudice. A single frown, a single, you don't belong here, is enough to strip away the truth. And you've done it all. No one dared breathe deeply. Even the hum of the air system seemed to fade. Captain Rogers stared at the floor. Clara bit her lip until it bled. Ethan collapsed into his seat, both hands clutching his head. Naomi inhaled deeply, then sat back in 3A. Her voice carried warm yet resonant across the cabin. Now I suggest we take off. But remember this flight is not only carrying passengers to Miami, it is carrying a lesson none of us will ever forget. Lynn whispered tearfully into her camera. This isn't just a flight. It's a reminder for all of us that sometimes silence is the strongest way to reveal the truth. The live stream ticked past 50,000 live viewers. Naomi had turned the tables. From someone dismissed and demeaned, she had become the mirror exposing the bias of the entire system. And in that moment, everyone in the cabin understood. This was never about a seat. This was about justice. The air in the business class cabin was as thick as fog. Naomi Carter sat upright, folding her copy of Forbes and placing it on the table. Slowly, she let her gaze sweep across the cabin, each face, each averted glance. Her eyes held no anger, yet their weight forced every person she looked at to bow their heads. "We will begin the flight," Captain Rogers finally spoke, his voice roughened. "And I apologize, Mrs. Carter." Naomi raised her hand to stop him. "Not yet, we cannot take off." Her words weren't loud, but each syllable struck with such clarity that the cabin trembled. Ethan Blake sprang up, restless. "What now? We've already wasted enough time." Naomi turned her gaze on him, slow, deliberate, razor-sharp. "The time lost was not because of me, but because of your prejudice. And today, we will remember that." She rose to her feet, adjusting the button on her blazer. Her stance was straight, the rhythm of her heels steady on the floor. Naomi resembled a judge about to pronounce a sentence. "Mr. Blake," she began, "what did you do today? You looked at me, a black woman, and instantly assumed I was in the wrong seat. You insulted, you raised your voice, you acted as though you alone held the right to be correct. And you did this even when the evidence before you said otherwise." Ethan swallowed hard, his fist clenching tight. I only... Naomi's hand cut through the air, silencing him. "You need not explain. More than 40,000 people out there are watching this live. They heard every word you said. They do not need me to retell it." She then turned to Clara, the head flight attendant. "And you, Mrs. James. When you saw the argument, you immediately chose to believe a white man's word instead of checking fairly. You smiled politely, yet your eyes assumed I was the problem. That was not just a mistake, that was biased." Clara trembled, her lips barely forming a whisper. I didn't mean to." Naomi nodded gently. "I know you didn't mean to. But prejudice doesn't need intention to wound. It seeps into how we see, how we decide. And the system will continue to fail so long as we say, 'I didn't mean to,' instead of 'I take responsibility.'" Clara broke down in tears. Black streaks smeared the carefully crafted makeup of a veteran flight attendant. Captain Rogers stood rigid. Naomi shifted her gaze to him. "And you, Captain, the man entrusted with the lives of hundreds on this flight. When you saw me silent and Mr. Blake loud, whom did you assume was wrong? You didn't investigate, didn't verify. You ordered, 'Leave the plane.' Do you know what that means? It means you were willing to expel a paying rightful passenger, simply because her skin color made you suspicious." Rogers swallowed painfully. His hands shook so violently that the file in them crackled. I was wrong." Naomi inclined her head slightly. Her eyes were no longer blades, but mirrors. "You were not just wrong with me. You were wrong with every passenger of color ever silenced and pushed aside. Today I had a voice, but how many others never had the chance?" The business cabin fell into complete silence. Every passenger felt as though they were being judged. A businesswoman who had scoffed earlier now bowed her head, murmuring, "She's right, we stayed silent." Naomi inhaled deeply, then turned fully toward the cabin. Her voice rang out, stronger than ever. "This is systemic racism. Not just cruel words. It hides in a frown, in a hasty decision, in the silence of the majority. You have seen it with your own eyes. And today, I want you all to remember, racism does not need violence to survive. It only needs the collusion of silence." Ethan Blake wiped sweat from his brow, clutching his head. "What do you want from me? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry, all right? I didn't mean it." Naomi stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. Her eyes held no fury, only pity. "Mr. Blake, you are not apologizing because you are wrong. You are apologizing because you were caught. You want to salvage your reputation, not change yourself." Ethan choked, his eyes red. Naomi returned to seat 3A and sat down. She no longer needed to stand to prove anything. The truth had already been laid bare before thousands of eyes, in the cabin and across the live stream. "We will continue this flight," she said, her voice low but firm, each word deliberate. "But from now on, things will be different. I will not let what happened today fade into memory. It will be a turning point to change the entire system." Ling Chun, fighting tears, spoke into her camera. "You've heard it. She didn't need to yell, Didn't need to argue. She turned this cabin into living proof of injustice. I've never seen calmness so powerful. The live stream reached 80,000 views. Comments flooded in. This woman is a symbol. I cried listening to her. This is how we must confront racism, by refusing silent complicity. Naomi reopened her magazine, flipping a page as if closing a courtroom in the sky. But every passenger knew. They had just lived through a moment that would be retold again and again. Ethan Blake sat hunched in his seat, unable to lift his face. Clara quietly wiped her tears. Rogers stood frozen, eyes empty. And Naomi Carter, the black woman once ordered off the plane, now stood as the mirror, forcing an entire system to face the truth. That moment was the climax. No one doubted it anymore. Naomi had transformed humiliation into an indictment, and her silence into the most powerful accusation of all. The roar of the airplane's engines still hummed outside the windows, but inside the business-class cabin, people seemed to forget they were sitting on a Boeing about to take off. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Naomi Carter, the woman who had just turned this cabin into a traveling courtroom. Naomi closed the Forbes magazine once more. She laid both hands flat on the table, palms down, as if to signal that she was no longer speaking to one person, but to everyone. You think I will just stay silent? Sit down and let this pass? No, I will not let this vanish like so many other incidents that were buried. Ethan Blake flinched, rushing to interrupt, his voice trembling but still clinging to his old authority. But you can't. I have the right to sit here. I paid... Naomi cut him off, her tone calm yet razor-sharp. Mr. Blake, your ticket does not give you the right to humiliate others. Your ticket does not give you the right to turn prejudice into a weapon. And above all, she paused, her eyes sweeping across the cabin, your ticket does not override the truth that I am the owner of this airline. The cabin held its breath. Naomi sat straighter, her voice now crisp, each word landing like a gavel. For your actions today, as of this moment, you are permanently banned from the entire Transworld airline system. For life. A wave of sound rippled through the passengers, gasps, stunned whispers. Ethan's face drained of color, his eyes wide. What? You can't do that? Naomi tilted her head, a cold smile flickering. I can, and I just did. Lingchen nearly burst into tears as she spoke into her phone. Oh my God, she just banned him for life. This is an unprecedented reversal. The live stream exploded, with 120,000 people watching live. Comments flooded the screen. Unbelievable. Justice delivered right here. First time I've ever seen a black woman flip the board like this. This has to become a case study immediately. But Naomi didn't stop there. Her gaze turned to Clara James, the trembling head flight attendant. And you. Over 20 years of flying experience, yet in the critical moment, you chose to side with the loudest voice instead of the silenced one. That is a failure, not only personal but systemic. Clara broke down, tears streaming over her carefully made-up face. Please, I truly didn't mean to. I just wanted the flight to go smoothly. Naomi nodded slowly, no cruelty in her eyes, only truth. Perhaps you didn't mean to, but tell me, when a passenger of color remembers today, will not meaning to be enough to heal them? What they will remember is that when they were doubted, you did not stand with them, and that is what makes up what we call systemic discrimination. Clara sobbed, bowing her head. I'm sorry, I'm ready to accept any punishment. Naomi exhaled once, then spoke firmly. I will not take your job, but you will be the first to attend our new unconscious bias training. And more than that, you will become an instructor in that very program, telling the story of today to thousands of colleagues. Because only when shame becomes a lesson does it have value. The cabin fell silent. A few passengers nodded, as if realizing Naomi was not only punishing, but building a new path. Naomi continued, this time turning toward Captain Rogers. And you, Captain, the greatest power on this flight belonged to you, and you used it to threaten, not to protect. Rogers swallowed hard, his eyes reddening. Mrs. Carter, I know I was wrong. I have no excuse. Naomi gave a slight nod, her gaze softer but her tone still steady. You will continue your work. But starting tomorrow, You will work directly with the newly established Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and you will report personally to me on every incident of discrimination you witness. You failed today, but I want you to be part of the solution, not part of the problem." A ripple of murmured agreement ran through the cabin. One passenger, a blonde businesswoman who earlier had mocked Naomi, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Carter, I want to apologize. I laughed when I shouldn't have. I was part of the silence you spoke of." Naomi turned to her, her eyes softening. "What matters is not that you were silent, but that you dare to admit it now. Remember this: silence can kill justice, but the right word, even if late, can still redeem." The woman bowed her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. Naomi sat back in her seat, quickly signing a few lines on the folder before her. She laid the pen down, her voice slow and deliberate. "So we have our first rulings, but don't think this ends with one flight. From Miami, I will launch a complete reform. No more cover-ups, no more defaults. Everything must change." Lin Chun turned her camera back toward Naomi, her own eyes red with emotion. "You see, she never yelled, never raged. She passed judgment like a judge, but planted hope like a teacher. This isn't just a moment. This is the beginning of a revolution in aviation." The livestream crossed 150,000 viewers. Naomi reopened the Forbes magazine, turned back to the old page, and lifted her gaze, calm, yet heavy with authority. "Now then, Captain, we may take off." The cabin fell silent once more, but this time it was not the silence of contempt. It was the silence of understanding. Everyone on board knew. They had just witnessed not merely an incident, but the first step of a much greater change. The aircraft slowly rolled toward the runway, and in seat 3A, Naomi Carter sat no longer as the one suspected, but as the woman who had just ignited a new era of justice in the skies. The massive Boeing finally lifted off the ground. The wheels rose, shuddered briefly, then steadied among grey clouds. The cabin trembled, but no one paid attention to the movement. Every gaze remained fixed on seat 3A, where Naomi Carter sat in quiet composure, her hands interlaced atop the closed magazine. No one spoke. The business cabin was as hushed as a cathedral. People no longer dared whisper, for they knew that every look, every frown they had cast earlier had now been exposed to the light. Naomi drew a deep breath, then stood once again. Her eyes swept the room, not sharp as blades now, but carrying a gentler weight, the kind of gentleness that makes people weep because it feels like forgiveness. "We cannot let this flight remain only a bitter memory," she began, her voice low and steady. "If it ends here, then every humiliation I endured earlier will have been meaningless. We must turn it into a beginning for change." Clara, the chief attendant, was still sniffling. Captain Rogers stood with folded arms, his eyes red-rimmed. Ethan Blake stared down at his clasped hands, sweat glistening on his forehead. Naomi motioned for the three of them to step into the empty forward cabin. Passengers followed with their eyes. Some raised their phones to record. Naomi did not stop them. She knew. The world needed to witness this. In the small forward cabin, Naomi sat across from Rogers, Clara, and Ethan. Her voice rang explicit, deliberate. "I do not want an apology, I want a plan." Captain Rogers blinked, confused. Plan?" "Exactly," Naomi replied. "A plan to ensure that what just happened will never happen again, not only to me, but to anyone." She placed a pen and a blank sheet of paper on the table, then looked straight at Rogers. "You are first. I want you to write a pledge. From now on, in any seating dispute, you will investigate fairly before making a decision. You will not assume one side is right simply because they are louder, or because of the color of their skin." Rogers lowered his head, his hand trembling as he wrote each word. Drops of sweat fell onto the page. When finished, he slid the paper across to Naomi. She did not read it immediately. She nodded, treating it as the first step. Naomi turned to Clara. "And you, Clara, you have over 20 years of experience, but today you proved that experience cannot replace justice. I want you to draft a proposal for a new training program, one that requires every attendant to study unconscious bias. And I want it to be real, not a token course. Can you do that?" Clara wiped her tears, her voice breaking. I will. I promise. Naomi tilted her head, her gaze piercing. Do it not for me. Do it for the next passenger who sits quietly in their seat, only to be judged unworthy. Finally, Naomi turned to Ethan Blake. He startled, stammering. I have nothing left to say. I was wrong. I truly was wrong. Naomi folded her arms, her eyes calm yet resolute. Mr. Blake, apologies are not enough. I want a public commitment. When this plane lands, you will record a video apology, not only to me but to everyone who has ever been dismissed simply for being different. You will post it on your official channels, and you will work with a civil rights organization for no less than the next 6 months. Ethan's face drained of color. That will destroy my career. Naomi cut him off. You have already destroyed it yourself. This is your last chance to turn your disgrace into something useful. You have a choice. Remain a disgraceful example, or become living proof of repentance. Ethan fell silent. After a long pause, he nodded. Naomi leaned back, eyes closing briefly. She drew a deep breath, then opened them again, looking at all three. You see, I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking change. If I removed you, someone else would repeat the same tomorrow. But if you change, the entire system changes. All three bowed their heads. In that moment, Naomi was no longer the woman humiliated in seat 3A. She was the one laying the foundation for reform. Back in her seat, Naomi opened her phone and swiftly typed an email to her team in Miami. When we land, prepare an emergency meeting room. We will announce a new policy package. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff. A direct reporting system for discrimination, escalated to the board. Zero tolerance for any conduct that humiliates passengers. This is not a promise, this is an order. She pressed send. Her finger trembled, not from fear, but from knowing she had just triggered a tidal wave that would ripple through the entire aviation industry. Ling Chun, still live streaming, whispered to hundreds of thousands watching outside. You are witnessing a meeting taking place in the sky. This is no longer an incident. This is the birth of a new policy. I feel as though I'm watching history unfold. The screen ticked upward, 250,000 live viewers. Naomi turned to the window. White clouds drifted past, the sunset painting the heavens red. In that silence, she whispered, not only to herself, but to all who were watching. Sometimes we must turn humiliation into fire, and to do so, we must remain silent long enough for the truth to speak on its own. The airplane continued its course toward Miami, but within the business cabin, another journey had begun, the journey of reforming a system once thought immovable. Sunlight in Florida streamed through the thick glass windows of Transworld Airlines' Miami headquarters. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight, yet its aftershocks still reverberated across the aviation industry and the nation. Naomi Carter stood at the window of the 32nd floor, gazing down at the runways below. Dozens of silver-blue Transworld planes taxied, lifted, and landed in seamless rhythm. Everything looked normal, but Naomi knew, deep within the system, a revolution was underway. A soft knock on the door. Sarah Kim, the newly appointed Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, stepped in with a thick stack of reports in her hands. Mrs. Carter, the Q2 report is ready, Sarah said, her voice edged with pride. The numbers are beyond expectations. Naomi nodded, signaling her to proceed. Sarah opened the report, reading clearly. Complaints related to racial discrimination dropped by 87% compared to the same period last year. Customer satisfaction scores rose by 31%. Bookings for business class by passengers of color tripled. Transworld's stock climbed 12% in the past 3 months, hitting a record high. The room fell silent for a beat, broken only by the turning of paper. Naomi exhaled softly, but did not smile. She knew those numbers were not just data, they were proof that the humiliation she once endured had become the seed of a harvest. Sarah went on, her eyes glowing. The Direct Reporting Discrimination app has had over 220,000 downloads. Every incident is sent straight to the board of directors, bypassing middle management. And most notably, she paused, lowering her voice, We've had to terminate 3 senior employees for policy violations. No one dares to look down on anyone anymore." Naomi gave a slight nod. "That's what I wanted. Justice isn't meant to sit in a report. It must be enforced, even when it's hard." A week later, inside a grand hall in New York, the National Aviation Conference commenced. A massive digital screen above the stage displayed the words, "The Carter Protocol, from discrimination to equity." Naomi stepped onto the podium. Thousands of representatives from the major carriers, Delta, American, United, Southwest, were in attendance. The press crowded in, camera flashes exploding like fireworks. Naomi began with silence. She placed both hands on the wooden lectern, staring directly at the hundreds of expectant faces. 6 months ago, I was asked to leave a flight, because they assumed I didn't belong in business class. I stayed silent. But that silence wasn't acceptance. It was allowing the truth to expose itself, and that truth forced us to change. A ripple of whispers swept across the hall. Many nodded. A few lowered their heads. Naomi pressed on, her voice firm. "Today, Transworld Airlines is no longer the company hiding behind late apologies. We are leading the reform. And I call upon every airline here, study us, copy us, outdo us. Because justice cannot live on a single aircraft, it must live on every flight." Thunderous applause filled the room, echoing long after. Back in Miami, Naomi sat at her desk and opened her computer. Headlines sprawled across the screen. As Transworld Airlines named the most equitable airline in America, and the Carter Protocol becomes industry standard. Harvard Business School lecture, case study on Naomi Carter. Naomi skimmed them, then allowed herself a small smile. But her true joy wasn't in the headlines. It was in the letters she received every day. A letter printed on pale yellow paper from Atlanta. "Dear Mrs. Carter, I am a black attorney. Last week, for the first time, I sat in business class without a single suspicious stare. I cried because I know I owe that to you. Thank you." An email from Los Angeles. "I'm a freshman. Your video on that flight inspired me to apply to aviation school. I want to be a flight attendant, not the kind who turns their back on passengers, but one who stands for fairness." Naomi read each word, then folded the letters quietly. Her eyes shimmered, not for the recognition of Wall Street, but because she knew actual change had touched the lives of ordinary people. And Ethan Blake? His image appeared on television, a simple suit, stripped of the arrogance he once wore. He stood before the cameras, admitting his mistakes during a symposium on unconscious bias organized by the NAACP. "I once thought a ticket gave me the right to look down on others. I once thought skin color was a measure of seating. But it was public humiliation that woke me up. I don't say this to seek forgiveness. I say this so people like me understand. Privilege is not power, not if we don't know how to use it properly." Naomi watched, neither smiling nor reproaching. She only nodded, whispering, "At last he understands." That late evening, Naomi stood on her balcony, looking out over the runway glittering with lights. The roar of engines rose, pulling back memories of that flight. But now, instead of humiliation, she felt only a profound stillness. She had turned the bitterest moment into the beginning of change. Naomi closed her eyes, remembering her father's gaze years ago. "You don't need to shout. You only need to stand firm. Then the world will reveal itself," she whispered, as if answering the memory. "I have stood firm, Father, and the world has changed." 6 months passed. A system had shifted. And it all began with a 42-year-old black woman, a seat 3A, and an unbroken silence. A late autumn morning in Miami. The air was mild, the sky high and clear as glass. Inside the 32nd floor office of Transworld Airlines headquarters, Naomi Carter was reviewing financial reports when her secretary entered, voice hesitant. "Mrs. Carter, a visitor is asking to see you. He doesn't have an appointment but insists he only needs 5 minutes. His name is—" Naomi looked up. "Ethan Blake." The secretary blinked in surprise. "Yes, that's right. Should I turn him away?" Naomi thought for a few seconds. 6 months ago, that name was tied to public humiliation, to a flushed face of rage, to the chilling words, "You don't belong here." But now she only nodded. Send him in. The door opened. Ethan Blake stepped in, stripped of his former arrogance. He looked thinner, his hair greying, his suit far plainer than before. No Rolex flashing on his wrist, no swaggering air. Only a middle-aged man, head bowed, is entering a room of elegance. "Mrs. Carter," he began, voice hoarse and measured, "thank you for giving me this chance." Naomi didn't invite him to sit immediately. She only studied him. Ethan shifted uneasily, fingers laced, eyes darting before settling on the floor. "Why are you here, Mr. Blake?" Naomi asked, her voice neither cold nor gentle. Ethan lifted his gaze, his eyes carrying both remorse and resolve. "I came to say, I'm sorry. But not only to you. Over the past 6 months, I've worked with the NAACP, training groups on unconscious bias. I've stood on podiums, telling people like me that prejudice is not truth, it's darkness, and we must tear it apart ourselves." Naomi stayed silent, letting him continue. "I lost my job. I lost many friends. My reputation became a joke. But at rock bottom, I realized I'd lived my whole life in a cage of privilege I never recognized. I thought I was strong, but I was only propped up by the system." His voice faltered. Ethan drew an envelope from his jacket, placing it on the polished wooden desk. "This is a copy of the testimony I'll deliver to Congress next week during the hearing on racial discrimination in the airline industry. I want you to read it first." Naomi lifted the envelope. Inside were printed pages, every word laid bare. "I am Ethan Blake. 6 months ago, I stood in a business-class cabin and thought skin color gave me the right to look down on someone. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I shouted, insulted, and tried to drive a woman from a seat she deserved more than anyone. That woman turned out to be the owner of the airline. But I understand now. The issue was not her true identity. The issue was that until she revealed her power, no one defended her. I testify today. This system must change." Naomi set the papers down. Her eyes were steady, fixed on Ethan. "You think I'll believe you've changed just because of a few pages?" Ethan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No. I don't expect you to believe right away. I only want you to see I'm walking a long road, a road of atonement. And I want you to know, because of that moment, I learned a lesson I never had in my life." Silence filled the room. Then Naomi gestured for him to sit. She leaned back, fingers interlocked. "Mr. Blake," she said slowly, "that day, you didn't just humiliate me. You forced the system to expose its deepest disease. If you truly want redemption, then do more. Not just testify before Congress, not just donate or apologize." Ethan raised his eyes, voice trembling. "What do you want me to do?" Naomi answered, each word deliberate. "I want you to be a living witness. Every time you step on a stage, every time you tell your story, let your humiliation be a mirror for others. Turn your mistake into a warning, and never forget you once wore the face of prejudice." Ethan drew a deep breath, then nodded. "I promise." For a moment there was stillness. Then Naomi exhaled, and for the first time, a gentle smile crossed her face. "Perhaps, Mr. Blake, your presence on that flight was also necessary. Without you, the truth would not have been laid bare so clearly. Your mistake became the stepping stone for change." Ethan's eyes glistened red. He bowed his head, whispering, "Thank you for not destroying me but forcing me to learn." Naomi nodded softly. "It was justice that taught you, not me. I only stayed silent so that you would reveal yourself." As Ethan left the office, the late autumn sunlight touched his face. For the first time in months, he walked without bowing. Not because he had regained pride, but because he had found something else, the chance to live a life with true meaning. Naomi watched his departing figure, her heart heavy yet calm. She knew changing a system was hard, but changing a person, changing a heart steeped in prejudice, was harder still. And today, she had seen a flicker of hope that it could be done. The story of Ethan Blake could not erase the humiliation of the past, but it proved that sometimes even the gravest offender can become living proof of awakening. And that is what makes change endure. 18 months after the incident, the world of aviation looked entirely different. Inside the Grand Hall of the United Nations in New York, thousands of delegates from across the globe filled every seat. Soft golden light illuminated the green flag adorned with the laurel wreath emblem. Amid the solemn air, a name was announced. Please welcome Dr. Naomi Carter, CEO of Transworld Airlines, founder of the Initiative for Human Dignity in Aviation. The entire hall rose to its feet. Applause thundered like rolling storms. Naomi stepped out from backstage. Her short hair bore strands of silver, and her deep navy suit was commanding yet straightforward. On her face, there was no trace of weariness, only the calm, unshakable composure of a woman who had walked through storms without losing herself. She stood behind the wooden lectern, waiting for the applause to settle. Then her voice rang out, slow, deliberate, unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not come here to tell you about a success. I came to tell you about a moment of humiliation. The hall fell into complete silence. I once sat on a flight, wearing a fine business suit, holding a valid business-class ticket in my hand. Yet to some, I was nothing more than a black woman who did not belong there. I was humiliated. I was ordered to leave, and nearly the entire system moved to erase me. Naomi paused. A few people lowered their heads, as if recalling that they too had once thought the same way, if only for a fleeting moment. But I did not leave. I sat still, silent. I let the truth reveal itself. And when people realized who I was, that silence spoke louder than any protest could. It showed that the problem was never my authority. It was the way this world sees my skin. Her voice grew slower but deeper, almost reverent. That day I learned that victory does not always come from shouting the loudest. Sometimes it comes from holding silence long enough for the truth to speak on its own. Naomi then spoke of the reforms that followed. Again, all global airlines had signed the Dignity Charter, committing to train their staff on unconscious bias. Then, a global complaint system was launched, allowing passengers to report discriminatory behavior immediately. And most importantly, stories like hers had been added into the training curriculum for pilots, flight attendants, and executives, so the next generation would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Each example brought nods from the audience, many eyes welled with tears. In the third row, Ethan Blake sat quietly. He had kept his promise. For 18 months, he had traveled everywhere, university halls, local churches, national television, sharing the story of his own mistake. He had become living proof that change was possible, but only if one dared to confront the darkness within. Naomi glanced down, caught his silhouette, and offered a slight nod. She needed no thanks. It was enough to know that because of that single moment long ago, one man had changed, and through him thousands of others had found light. When her speech ended, the hall erupted into a standing ovation. Leaders, ambassadors, and international journalists surged toward her. But Naomi only smiled, humbly, and stepped back. Because she knew today was not a day to glorify one individual. Today was the day human dignity, regardless of skin color, was recognized as an unshakable principle. That evening, Naomi returned to her modest seaside apartment in Miami. She sat on the balcony, watching silver waves crash against the shore. In the wind, she remembered the moment when ice-cold cola had spilled down her shoulders. A moment that once seemed set to drown her, but instead had become the spark that lit up the world. Naomi whispered, as if to herself, and everyone listening in silence. Dignity is not something someone else can grant. It is what we are born with. And once we hold on to it, no one can ever take it away.